Matthew, welcome to the Listen.Better podcast this afternoon. Really delighted you've made the time in what must be an action-packed role at Thames Water. But pre that, I understand you were a journalist. What was it like making the transition from that to an in-house role?
It was actually surprisingly easy because there's so many transferable skills from what we did. So if you think of journalism in its basic form, it's understanding and simplifying stories or messages. It's finding a way of delivering them to the audience in a way that they appreciate. And if you take that view of internal comms, it's kind of the same, right? So we're understanding big, complex, potentially serious messaging or subjects, and we're writing them up. We're kind of finding the best way to deliver them and making sure that they're sort of suitable for the audiences we got. So yeah, there's a lot of transferable skills. But I started from the journalism career. I started on the internal Source magazine, which is our internal in-house magazine for employees. And actually, that 3 months that I did that was a real eye-opener into what this world was and what Thames Water was like. So that gave me a lot of confidence in when I finally got asked to take on the wastewater communications role. I already had a good base understanding of what the business was. But yeah, I think there's a lot of transferable skills between journalism and what we do now. Although in journalism, you never have a strategy, a plan, an approach, and things like that. You just kind of get on with it because it's natural. So a lot of those things you learn across the way.
Must have been quite daunting to going into a completely new environment and trying to upskill rapidly. How did you find that?
It was when I first arrived at Thames, you've got all these very smart, very professional, very sort of big rooms and wings of hundreds of people on each wing. And you kind of walk in the building. And if you're used to working in newspapers, you're kind of working in a pretty crummy office on an industrial estate with about 8 of you in a room and really crappy technology. And then you come into this sort of environment, you think, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do this. And then within about 3 weeks, you got to go, okay, yeah, I get it now. They're just people in a different environment, and they've all got a job to do, and you integrate really well. It's a really friendly place to work here, and you kind of understand what everyone's doing, and you get on. So yeah, it wasn't. It was daunting at the first, but after you sort of learn that, you've got some of the skills that required to, write, fundamentally write stuff and understand stuff and simplify stuff, it got a lot easier.
I always find it interesting when making a transition that you don't actually realize how much you know until you're immersed in that, and then suddenly, and that confidence then builds when you realize actually you're probably one step ahead of other people in your team. So that plays well.
I've never described myself as a writer, never described myself as anything other than a newspaper reporter. And then when you realize that the last 32 years of your life you've spent mostly writing stuff, you kind of go, and I still don't like saying it now, I'm not a professional writer. I write professionally, but I don't class myself as any sort of great author, or I just putting words together that make sense and in the right order, right? That's writing in many ways, and simplifying things that you need to understand before you simplify. So that's really kind of the key things that I take away from the two things.
You've mentioned writing. What other skills would you say you need to be a great internal comms practitioner? And on that, what would you give as advice to perhaps someone starting their career in IC?
So I think number one, you have to be curious about the industry or business you're working in, or the environment you're working in, because I think if you don't understand the people that you work with, how the company makes money, what each of the different parts of the company do, it's really difficult then to kind of then relate to people in a way that they already know, right? So if you're trying to write something about a subject that everybody knows, and you get it wrong, you're guaranteed that the first thing they're going to be doing is going, Matt, this isn't what we do. This is not how it is. So that's number one. So being really curious about the business, and not just your little chunk of it. So say we've got a retail team are only interested in the retail side of it. How do they then kind of adopt the operational side of it as well into their mindset? Because being siloed in a kind of I just do this job really stops you finding all the opportunities you can have to communicate more widely about the bigger picture, the organization's goals, everything like that. So being curious, absolutely number one. Being enthusiastic and willing to learn, number two, because no one sort of goes to school and says, I want to be internal comms. Nearly everybody I know has fallen into it from all sorts of backgrounds. So being enthusiastic and willing to learn a new skill set, a new kind of new job, new role is 100%. That's what we look for in all of our candidates, especially at the more junior level. The entry level is huge enthusiasm, good attitude. I'm someone who's willing to get stuck in and just do what it takes to do what we do. Because every day's different. Every day you might be working on one thing, and then the next thing comes along, and your plans are upended. So learn to live a little bit with chaos and ambiguity is really key. And then I suppose just that bit around working in a team and being willing to ask questions, and realizing you don't know all the answers, because I've been at Thames 9 years, and every week I find a new department I never knew about, or a new thing that we do that I didn't know about, and I think I know the business pretty well. So yeah, just being open and resilience. I think resilience is key. It can be quite a stressful job. You've got deadlines looming a lot. You've got a lot of changing plans. You've got kind of a lot of reactive stuff to do, as well as your planned stuff. So being able to be adaptable and flexible in the role as well is really key.
Fantastic. So curiosity, enthusiasm, energy, being a team player, resilience, all key components of a great internal communicator. Fantastic. I really like that idea. And often when I talk to leaders in internal comms, there's this idea there are silos, and being the head of internal comms, you've got the license to be kind of nosy, but curious is the nicer word, to really understand what's going on and to do some joining up across those silos. So yeah, you resonate with, I resonate with what you're saying there. So without revealing any, big secrets, this isn't a Jeremy Paxman interview, but can you tell me some of the challenges you identified when you first came into the role at Thames Water?
I think the existing structure when I joined was very corporate focused. So it was all about the big corporate events, what happens in the head office, all of the things that went on there, because I think there was a sort of a desire to kind of show the senior leaders and the CEO at the time that look at all the comms we're doing, when in reality, the audience was the front line, was our call center agents, the people in vans, the people on our sites. And it was, without disparaging anyone, it was kind of overlooked. And I think out of a team of about 15, you had 2 people who worked in the operational side of the business, which is 3/4 of the business. So the focus was very much on the big glitzy, campaigny, show busy, things on walls, whereas in reality they really struggled to actually engage with the workforce. So the big thing I did when I took over wastewater comms was, and it was a new structure, so it was a new business unit that they set up, and it was, who are our people, where are they, how do they work, what's their environment like, what technology have they got. And I think the first thing we did was we had this something like 6-month old headcount report, and it was in print. It was printed out, so it wasn't even online. And that was our Bible for, right, how many people at Beckton? Europe's largest sewage works. Oh, it's 188 people. That's quite a significant audience. Who's the managers in that area? And it took us a long while to actually get that data to be part of our everyday. So we get a twice monthly report now. So it shows everybody everywhere, line managers, all the data you need to be able to reach anybody in the business as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So yeah, it was an interesting time. But I mean, one of the comments I got from one of my stakeholders was that we gave the frontliner voice, which I'm really proud of, because my first week here, I went to a lot of sites and visited a lot of people. So what do you know about what's going on? And there was just a big blank. And I said, right, that's my test. I need to come back here in 6 months or a year's time and say, what's going on? And they tell me the stuff that we put in comms. So yeah, a lot of work went into that, and we're still working at it now, because no one's perfect.
So fantastic. So in just under a decade, you've moved from looking at printed out copies of who might be around that was outdated by 6 months to a online, twice a month, updated, where people are, so a proper mapped out workforce.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Essential when you're trying to tailor content for your many audiences. So if you're really honest, tell me what in hindsight you might have done differently.
Yeah, I think not really understanding, because I came in this from journalism. I didn't even know what internal comms was. And it was basically, I didn't do enough research. I didn't do enough learning. I just presumed I can do this. It'll be fine. I kind of know what words are, and I know how to deliver them. And what I should have done was got on the internet and typed in, what is internal comms? What's a good comms strategy? What's a good comms approach? Because I had to learn all of that through kind of bluster and bluff because I didn't even understand those words. I didn't know what a strategy was. I didn't really understand what tactics were. And that was the language of the corporate office. And so I'd often go into a meeting and it would be, Matt, what's the strategy for this? And I'd be like, whoa. And so actually just using, the vast array of knowledge online to kind of get you over that bump. In the end, I did sit down with one of our brilliant transformation and change people, and he said, "Look, Matt, let's learn what strategy is." He took me through it, and he took everything I had, and he put it all on a board in a web diagram, and I went, "Yeah, that looks pretty good." He said, "That's a strategy, Matt," and I said, "God, that's quite easy, really." But not knowing it, not knowing what the job was, what learn. That was the thing I should have done early, and that would have probably spent my first 6 months less floundering and more getting on with stuff.
Very good, very good. Let's deep dive, and excuse the puns because we're in the water sector. But what kind of crises might come up? How do you plan for those, and what's the approach?
Yeah, well, we at Thames Water, and if you are a Thames Water customer or you live in the London area or the Thames Valley area, you'll know one of the biggest things that happens in Thames Water is our pipes burst. They're old, they burst, and it's a regular occurrence for all water companies. We just happen to have some really big bursts because we have some really big trunk mains in London, and they are cause chaos for our customers. They cause real disruption, and we can flood customers, and it's a real serious issue for us in getting that service back on. So we are quite adept at our operational response, and we've worked really hard on what we do when something like that happens, and it's really, really quick and clear. What we didn't have until about 2 or 3, maybe 4 years ago, was a really clear idea of how we communicate during a crisis. And a lot of work's gone into that. I now lead the public information office, which is the team of people who are on call 24/7, out of hours and weekends. To if it goes off, you get a call and you're on the call. So we have very structured incident management calls with the right work streams, or we call them towers. So a return to service work stream, a customer work stream, a comms work stream, and then basically the three questions we need to answer and get the information out as quickly as possible are: what's happened, what are we doing about it, and when are the taps going to start running again? Because they're the kind of key questions we always do. So when service going to be returned, and out of that as well, you clearly got, if it's more of an internal focused incident, you've got what actions do people need to take to either help with the incident or understand what the incident is. So go back to COVID, everyone's crisis, and I think a lot of teams learned a lot of things very quickly through there. We just took a lot of our learning of how we would deal with an external problem and brought it internally. So what was our three work streams? So we had what's our operational response. We knew that we were sending people home, so what's our staying connected response? And we knew that this would cause a lot of distress and angst amongst a lot of people, so what's our well-being response? So those three things built the strategy, and through that's how we communicate with our people during this. And as everyone knows, during COVID, you probably, when the government announced something, it was the night before or the afternoon before, and you had to react to that. So for that first few months, it was very much, what does this mean for the company, and how quickly can we put this into action, and how can we tell our people what we need them to do? And again, just having simple things on your emails, if you're doing email, what are the actions from that email? So just very quickly at the top, 1, 2, 3, these are the actions, and making sure you're going to the right audience with the right messaging. So we had central messaging, then we had operational messaging and retail messaging. But yeah, I think being clear in crisis comms, what is it you need people to do, and making sure you go to the right people with those messages as well. Absolutely clear. But having a structure in place that is there to help the business recover from the crisis, and you're part of that, and you're at the table, and you're adding into that, is absolutely crucial, because there's nothing worse than someone's had a meeting about a crisis and they say, Matt, can you comms this? And I'll be like, well, what is it? Because I'm not in the conversation. So how do I help you best? So luckily, well, not luckily, because we've worked hard at it. We were the gold command for COVID. We were part of that structure, and we're part of every structure for every crisis in the business as a comms structure.
Gosh, fascinating. Well, yes, COVID you've mentioned, and I did want to come on to that. So during the pandemic, if you cast your mind back to how you were, how you operated as a leader pre, during, and post, what lessons do you think you will carry through to this current role or future roles in 2023 and beyond?
The interesting part about that was I just got this role in 2019, and we'd gone from a fairly large structure, decentralized, to a much smaller team, centralized. So my first sort of few months in that role, I mean 2 or 3 months, was how do I get this team that was disparate and separate and working not particularly well, and try and get them cohesive. And then I think it was we started getting involved in the COVID calls pre-Christmas, and then I just remember the day quite clearly of when, oh, this has changed. And then by March 23rd, we're in lockdown, everyone's gone home. And it was just that bit up front about reassuring the team that while we didn't know what was going to happen, that we would support the team itself, but as a team that communicates, we had a critical role to play. So it was about making sure that the team were right, the team were not comfortable with it because nobody was, but that they were looked after and their well-being was looked after, and we walked through any concerns they might have had, because we knew we had to step up, and we knew we had to step up into a role that would help everybody else feel the same way. So that was the key one. In many ways, it made the team cohesive quite quickly because it had to be. And we also were able to drop a lot of things, right? So COVID was the number one thing we communicated. So in many ways, there was that advantage of it. This is the only game in town, but it really was about, what is our strategy and how are we going to manage that? Now, again, it was a lot of work. It was intense, and I know everybody who lived through that and worked through that knows exactly how difficult that was. But because we had the kind of reactive nature in our communications to be able to do that, it became BAU very quickly. So within about 3 months, we were like, okay, we've done the comms now, so we know what we're doing, and it carried on for a long time, and we managed to then advance it. So it wasn't just about what the company and people needed to do, is what the company was doing in the UK's response to COVID. So we had Praise Friday, where we'd look at all the things that people were saying about what we were doing in our response, and it became kind of from an operational kind of point of view to look at what we're doing in a major pandemic and look at what part we're playing. Everyone had to wash their hands, right? You need water to do that. So there was all of those things that actually brought a lot of purpose to our jobs and the worth we were having in the country. So it was, I'm not going to say it had a silver lining, because it didn't. It was horrific, but there was a lot of advantages from that.
You're clearly a people person, Matt, because I asked you to talk about what lessons you've learned for yourself, and you've talked very generously about how everyone responded, and that the team became very um, proactive against a backdrop of having got good strategies in for crisis and comms. How did you manage your own mental health and well-being through that turbulent period?
I mean, having a career as a journalist helps you with resilience a lot, because every single week, every day, depending on the kind of newspaper you work on, you face a little mini crisis every day. So you kind of learn to sort of react to, those things quite quickly. I think from a mental health perspective, you've just got to understand when you're not feeling right, when you're not in the right frame of mind, or you kind of those warning points, and you kind of learn that, but then you find new ones, and you kind of go, oh, I don't feel very good today, I don't feel quite myself today. But then forgiving yourself for that, because ultimately everyone has off days, and if you're not allowing yourself the time to recover from things like intense work, so recovery for me is a really big key thing. You can work all week really hard, you can work 12 hours a day really hard, and then Monday comes and you think you can do it again, but you feel flat. And it's that bit where you go, well, you know what, I feel really quite tired and quite fatigued because I did all that work. Just understanding that you need everyone needs time to recover, because you cannot run a marathon every day and expect to run a marathon the next day and the next day and the next day. So what's
Unless,
your recovery?
unless you're Eddie Izzard, I think he did 26 back-to-backs, but
Yeah,
I'm
well,
not
yeah.
sure. Probably with a big entourage to support him. Okay, and just coming on to a final question for you today, Matthew. Um, who or what are your influences or your mentors that keep you motivated and passionate about the role you have?
I think coming from newspapers, you always look to those really good editors. So you look at those really good editors who treat people with respect, but get the job done, but push you to be better at your job. And I think that's definitely one from newspapers. In the corporate world, it's very different, because you don't have that same kind of dynamic. So I always look at the really calm, serene exec senior leaders, and I'm not looking at them going, this is kind of a really big deal you're involved in here, and you're just completely like, calm and collected and cool, and you just have a chat with them, and you kind of go, is that normal? And they're like, no, it's not normal. No, it's just kind of a big. And I said, but didn't you feel? And they're like, no, it's fine. We get through it because we know that we got through it before. So I think those are the people I always look to sort of go, with their super stressful, super high powered, super kind of busy jobs, that they never kind of lose their cool. And you go, I want to be that person. I'm not that person, but I want to be that person. And then you build a relationship with them, and you realize they're just like you, but they've been doing it longer, or they're kind of, some of the things they're doing are normal to them, and it's just they moved on. And you kind of go, oh, that's really interesting to kind of see that, even if you look at the CEOs of various organizations you work in, they're just like us. And that's where I always get to. And so it's those people I can learn from. And wherever they're not necessarily in comms, but across in strategy and corporate affairs and in HR, all of that, that's who I learn from. And you learn little bits from everybody, and you kind of, and then you try and adopt some of that stuff into your own working life. And you kind of go, yeah, I get this now.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
I've got an image of a swan floating by with that sort of serene power on top, but probably working very hard underneath, or perhaps keeping things close to the. Brilliant. I'm going to wrap up there and say thank you so much for your time today. Really interesting to get a little bit of an inner story of what it's like working wastewater comms at Thames Water. Thank you so much, and look forward to crossing paths with you later in the year, I hope.
Thanks, Annabelle. It's been a good experience.